Hi, I'm Judy Cole, the Executive Vice President and CEO of the MIT Alumni Association, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this web production of the MIT Alumni Association.
This is the MIT Alumni Association Faculty Forum Online. My name's Kurt Vanlehn, and I'm the Diane and Gary Tooker Chair for Effective Education in STEM. I'm in the Department of Computing, Informatics, and Decision Science Engineering at Arizona State University. And today I'm going to serve as moderator for our panel, which is on the innovations in MOOCs. And to ask questions, all you have to do is fill out the form, which is below your screen. And we'll try and get to as many questions as we can. So we have a distinguished panel today, and I'd like to introduce them. David Cox, PhD, is going to be one of our panelists. He's the Assistant Professor of Medicine and Cellular Biology and a Professor of Computer Science at Harvard University. Also with us will be Armando Fox, who is a Professor of Electrical Engineering and Computer Science at the University of California, Berkeley, and Jonathan Katz, Professor of Computer Science, University of Maryland, and also Director of Maryland Cybersecurity Center. So hello, panel, and why don't we start by having our panel say a little bit about what they've been up to and who they are and what they do, and I guess we'll just go alphabetically. David, you want to start off, please?
Sure. So for the past couple years, I've been teaching a course called MCB 80X, Molecular and Cellular Biology 80X, which is an introductory neuroscience course. And I can just show you what that looks like real quick. And basically, when I agreed to do this was right when edX was first coming about, and we thought that it would be exciting and interesting to sort of push the envelope in a couple ways on what MOOCs normally do. So I'm just going to run you through very quickly some of the things we're doing that are maybe a little bit different than how some other MOOCs have traditionally operated. So one of the things we did is we actually didn't have any time spent in the lecture hall. So we actually filmed everything on location, either in a lab or in a museum. And we also enlisted this huge array of interesting creative artists and science communicators who made these wonderful sort of claymation animations. These are, I'm not showing you the video because I don't think it would carry well over the Hangout, but we have these, and we have all cartoonists, illustrators, illustrating different topics in neuroscience. And this was a lot of fun to work with a lot of different creative people of various kinds. We also took the course into places that you couldn't go in a traditional lecture. Our watchword was sort of, how can we make this even more appealing than a traditional lecture experience? So we actually filmed neurosurgery and had an extended sort of mini documentary. And we have actually a series of different little mini documentaries like this that we've included in the course. And then we also were excited to play with the format of MOOCs. A lot of MOOCs end up being sort of straight video experiences where basically you just watch someone giving a lecture. But web browsers can actually do quite a bit more than that. So we developed this whole series of sort of automated sort of professor automata, so little automated lectures where there'd be a voiceover from me giving a lecture, but then we'd actually ask the student to do something mid-lecture. So we'd say, you know, how can you make this neuron fire faster or fire with or disrupt the action potential or whatever we were covering in that particular course. And these are all sort of sliders and little sort of puzzles and games that the students can play in line with the lectures. And then depending on whether the students got it right or wrong, we can sort of fork in different directions. We can do these nonlinear experiences, a little bit more like how you would have a one-on-one interaction with a tutor than, say, how you might have a one-on-many interaction with a professor in a lecture hall. And these are also huge sources of data coming in. So at last count, we had tens of millions of interaction data points from these lectures. So a huge opportunity for research that we're just now starting to tackle. And the other thing we did, which was a little bit unusual, is oftentimes complaint about MOOCs is that they're solely an in the browser online experience. But what we wanted to do is actually encourage people to try real things at home. So we partnered with a company called Backyard Brains that makes these simple kits that anyone can use. You can basically use them in your kitchen or wherever, and In this case, it's a kit for doing a very rudimentary electrophysiology experiment in this case, on a cockroach, or you can do them on worms as well. And you can buy these kits. They're relatively inexpensive. And we had Greg Gage from Backyard Brains come, and we filmed sort of lessons on how to use these kits. But then we turned around and tried to get as many people as we could around the world using these kits. And we ran a Kickstarter, which was successful, to fund having as many of these kits get out there as we possibly could. So we ended up learning all kinds of things that we didn't previously know about import duties and customs associated with shipping these things all over the place. But as a result, we had these wonderful videos come back to us of different students trying experiments at home and trying new things. So here's a Singaporean cockroach that someone cornered in an alley and did an experiment where you could record the action potentials, record the nerve impulses in the leg as you stimulate different little sort of hairs on the leg. And then we had also students of all kinds of different ages. So this was actually a homeschooled high school student who really took to this DIY science sort of experience, and she started doing her own experiments, and they weren't always right, but it was really exciting to see her starting to think up new experiments, and then having us all get together as a community and sort of puzzle over what the experiments meant. She also shared some of her lab notebooks with us, which was also very fun to have this very broad experience with lots of different kinds of people involved. And of course, this is also an opportunity to interact with a huge number of people. I should mention Nadia Oratelt in particular, who's another alum of MIT, who's really been the creative force behind this, and lots of other people. So with that, I'll stop because my 5 minutes is just up, and I'll cede the floor.
Oops, I'm muted. Sorry about that. I was just asking Armando to get started, but I was muted. So please go ahead, Armando.
Okay. Hopefully this bit of techno wizardry will work if I do screen share. So hopefully you can see that. So I'm a software guy. I'm a computer scientist, which means that I don't have any slides about my MOOC experience that are nearly as cool as the ones that we just saw. You've got me wanting to rush out and buy one of these cockroach torture kits in order to learn some neuroscience. That's a really neat-looking course. But having said that, we were one of the first MOOCs on edX. In fact, we were on Coursera, and in fact, we were on Coursera before it was Coursera. Dave Patterson and I teach a software engineering course that is based on a course we successfully reinvented at Berkeley. So we sort of fell into the MOOCs thing by accident because we had been thinking about how we could improve and scale up our campus course, and we'd been doing a lot of thinking about automatic grading and how you could go beyond the sort of multiple choice and short answer questions for automatic grading. And essentially we got invited by Andrew Ng and Daphne Kohler before Coursera was really a company to sort of try out adapting part of our course to this platform that they had deployed at Stanford. And really the reason we got into it is we thought if we accept this invitation, it will be a forcing function for us to really figure out whether we can do effective machine grading at scale for a programming course where having students answer multiple choice questions isn't really sufficient to assess if they know what they're doing. So the experience of doing that has actually been quite eye-opening. If I can, oops, let me make sure I can, there we go. The course is still running on edX. We're I think going into our 6th or maybe 7th offering, and we have a facilitator, as a professor colleague of ours at Hawaii Pacific University, who was actually an alumnus of the first run of the course, and along with some core contributors that he's recruited who are also alumni, they've greatly improved the material in our MOOC. We were, I think, among the first to create serious external autograders for MOOCs. We put, at this point, more than 1,500 engineer hours into autograders that can grade full programming assignments. They do some pretty sophisticated mutation testing. I am unabashed about, the autograding and getting instant feedback for students that goes beyond multiple choice questions. I think that is the secret weapon of MOOCs, and I think that the biggest benefit, and people do get hung up on the videos, as David pointed out. I think the videos in many cases are largely irrelevant. It's the fact that students can get access to great learning materials and also exercises that non-trivially require them to test their mastery, get instant feedback, have the opportunity to improve. So, creating those autograders has been an enormous amount of work, but it's amortized incredibly well. So that's why I think if we sort of try to project out to infinity where MOOCs are going to go, I think the real legacy is that they're going to cause a significant change in how campus courses are taught. And in fact, at Berkeley, I think we've heard more people talking about teaching in general as a result of the MOOC revolution than in sort of the last 10 years, certainly in my time there. I think MOOCs are going to make curricular technology transfer a lot smoother. I think instructors who have developed great materials will be able to not only disseminate them, but also more readily incorporate improvements made by their peers. And we've always sort of been able to write textbooks, and in fact, we have written a textbook around our course, but the combination of the book and all these other interactive materials, I think, is much greater than the individual parts. And I think they're stimulating research in this area. Kurt and I have already served on a couple of program committees together, and I feel like a little bit of a newbie because here I am surrounded by all these people who actually study for a living how people learn and how we can teach them effectively. And here I am. I've been teaching for N years, and half the time my reaction is, why didn't anybody tell me about this stuff? Why wasn't I reading these papers? And so I've just sort of become obsessed with getting good, actionable research results, both from that literature and from the new opportunities of online, and trying to encapsulate that in the kinds of tools that MOOCs have made it possible to disseminate rapidly and inexpensively. So let me give sort of one example of each of these 3 bullet points, and that'll be my contribution here. My on-campus software engineering course is 240 students, which probably doesn't sound that large by CS standards. The interesting thing about it is that the final project in the course is a team project, and this semester we had 40 6-person teams. Every project is different. They work with real customers. Typically, they're nonprofits or campus units that need some software built. And it's me and 5 20-hour-a-week TAs who are running this. So these are the projects that they're doing in addition to all of the MOOC materials, which is 5 programming assignments, 3 midterms, 12 quizzes, section meetings, a whole bunch of other stuff. The only reason this works on campus is the autograders have relieved us of essentially all of the energy required to do the parts of the course that scale up. So roughly all of my time when I teach the course and all of the TA's time is focused on these student projects. And in retrospect, it should have been obvious that it would have that effect, but this is a course that used to have maybe 50 students in it. So we've been able to scale up the course. The students like it better. Their projects are stronger. And I think it's because we have taken all of the stuff we built for the MOOC and put it back into the classroom setting. Not as, we don't have the students on campus taking the MOOC, but we have them using those materials in addition to the other instructor-intensive stuff that we do, like these design projects. So if it wasn't for the MOOC technology and how well that runs, there's no way that one professor and 5 TAs could teach a high-quality, well-regarded course where 40 6-person teams do 40 different projects with 40 different customers. I know a lot of people talk about flipping the classroom. That's fine as far as it goes. We did a little of it, but I am not religious about flipping the classroom. I think the real advantage to focus on is the instructor leverage can now be shifted to much higher payback activities like focusing on these design meetings. We've also started experimenting with ways that we can collect data from students in the MOOC and help students in the campus course. This is a prototype of a tool we're building to help students improve their programming style by generating hints based on other correct submissions that are a little bit better stylistically than their own. And this works because we can build an enormous graph of the student submissions from the MOOC, and we can find paths from any given student submission to a higher quality one, essentially doing incremental improvements one at a time. Now in my campus class, 240 students is not enough to build this graph, but if we build it from order of 1,000 students who are doing this homework in the MOOC, and then we throw my campus students into it, then it works. So we're finding ways that the scale of MOOCs, which sort of began as a challenge, can actually become a benefit. We're looking for ways to help to have that scale enrich the campus course rather than thinking that we have to sort of fight it. I mentioned curricular technology transfer. We had a core group of 5 other pioneer instructors who attempted to take our MOOC materials and our book and teach it in their class. And a thing to notice is that the people who are actually reusing our slides or videos, most people aren't really doing that. They're really mixing it up and bringing their own stamp to the class. They prepare their own lectures, sometimes by reviewing our materials. So the fact that the auto graders and this automation technology is packaged in a way that makes it easy to deploy really lowers the bar for them to adopt our materials and some of our approach. And that has led a number of us to start getting interested in what we can do both in the MOOC and in large campus courses that would actually improve student learning outcomes. There's a mountain of literature on why students discussing answers to problems in groups actually helps them learn better. My colleagues Marty Hurst and Bjorn Hartman and I have been doing a prototype to see if we can bring some of those advantages to an online setting where the students may not be co-located in time and space. And we've already had this used both in a MOOC and in some large campus courses at some of our peer institutions. So, we see MOOCs in part as a way to test out some research that we've deployed on campus, and then from the much larger MOOC population, gather interesting data sets that can be used to enrich what we do on campus. And there's sort of this virtuous cycle that I think was impossible before, that it's enabled by the scale of essentially other students in the world beta testing our materials. So that's my view of why we're into MOOCs. It's great that a lot of people can get access to materials, free education. I'm on board with all of that. But I think this is really finally causing a serious change in the way that we think about both campus teaching and teaching the rest of the world. And I think facilitated models where students not on campus will have access to coaches, mentors, and so on alongside the free materials, I think that's the future. That's my future anyway. So with that, let me stop because I know my time is up. And I'm looking forward to some great discussions after we hear from the rest of the panelists.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Armando. Okay, Jonathan, you want to fill us in on what you've been up to?
Sure. It's interesting to me, actually, to hear how we all came at this from somewhat different backgrounds, and some of us have been at it longer than others, and we're all teaching different styles of courses. In my case, the course I'm teaching is a cryptography course on Coursera, and this is more of a theoretical course, so that there are programming assignments as well. So some of what the previous speakers have said didn't really apply to my course as much. It's also interesting from our point of view, the way we came at this. So Coursera, to some extent, approached us at the University of Maryland. We've only been doing so I'll explain in a minute. It goes beyond just me. What Coursera has been doing over the past year and a half or so is developing what they call specializations, which are a sequence of multiple courses, all organized around a particular theme. And in our particular case, they were interested in offering a specialization in cybersecurity. And so they approached us and asked if we would be able to put one together, come up with multiple courses that would all interact with each other in some way and allow students to take all of them and get and learn something together collectively from all of them. And so what was interesting then is we sort of had to twist arms a little bit to get people to volunteer. I mean, people knew how much work would be involved. I guess actually our expectations were lower than what turned out to actually be the amount of work involved. But people were maybe a little bit reluctant. We ended up only pulling from tenured professors. We felt actually this was a burden that we wouldn't want to put on untenured faculty. I think rightly so, because it really is a lot of work, and it ends up not really being something you can put on a CV, and not yet something that really helps you toward getting tenure. So anyway, in the end, we ended up developing a 5-course sequence. It's 4 courses and then a sort of a capstone course at the end. We've been offering them for, I guess, coming up on about 9 months now. So my course has run twice. The second offering just finished up. We're going to move to a model where all the courses will be available on demand once every month. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out, because in the past 2 offerings of the course, I was involved heavily in monitoring the discussion boards, answering questions, and helping students and things like that. But with it moving to a once-a-month kind of a format, I simply can't do that. So we're going to be pulling TAs and assigning them to each of the classes and having them be responsible for taking over that role. So that'll be interesting to see. As far as the mechanics of getting the course going, it's also interesting for me to hear how much support the others had. We had a little bit less support available for us. We did have student interns who were helping me develop the course. But beyond that, all the content was my own. The recording was done on my own. The video editing, the basic video editing was done on my own. The more advanced video editing was done by a student who was more expert in that software. But it was really great for me. I mean, the experience was fantastic. It gave me a chance, I think, echoing a little bit what Armando said, to rethink what I wanted to cover, to kind of condense the material. It's a little bit, I say it's about 2/3 of what I cover in the campus offering of my course. And so it forced me to kind of distill what I think are the most important 2/3 of the material, forced me to think about the best way to convey the material, forced me to think or to rethink about what kind of exercises I wanted the students to do. And I'm looking forward, actually, to the next time I teach the course on campus, which will be in the at the beginning of the new year. I'm planning to try a flipped classroom model where I can have the students watch the videos in advance and kind of learn the basics of the material, and then focus the class time itself on going more in depth, on answering student questions, on asking them more challenging problems and having them work them out live in the classroom. And so I'm really excited about that possibility.
Wow, great. Thanks very much, Jonathan. All right, having had a chance to hear what all of our presenters, panelists are about, it's time for some questions. I believe they're going to appear on the screen. Is that right? If not, I can read them off the resource I have here. Okay, first question is, what's the future of things like the Khan Academy? Will colleges do a better job via MOOCs at getting students ready for college, or nonprofits? Armando, would you like to take a crack at that?
Yeah, I would actually, and the reason I want to take a crack at it is, as I mentioned, because I got so excited about this and have been getting involved with people who do learning sciences research, it's been really an experience that's resulted in a certain amount of humility. Most of us who have done MOOCs probably went into it as instructors who already had very good teaching ratings, and you know, the biggest revelation to me is how much I don't know and how much good research can actually tell us about what works well for students to learn certain types of material. So, you know, I was at a thing a couple of years ago where Candace Thiel, who's a very well-known researcher in this area, stood up and said, you know, this MOOC thing is really interesting, but academics who are doing this research need to sort of own the narrative about what research can tell us about what works and what doesn't work. So, you know, that's my long-winded way of saying that I think it's great that all these nonprofits are getting materials out there. The Khan Academy materials are great. I think the fact that we have a lot of interactive materials out there is wonderful, but that doesn't relieve us of the responsibility to understand how can those materials be used to actually get people to learn stuff. At what level do they need coaching, scaffolding, mentoring? Can it be provided in some cases by things like intelligent tutoring systems, and at what point, where does a human sort of step in for the maximum leverage to help them out? So I don't think it's really just a question of is it colleges versus nonprofits. I think it's a matter of we need some more principled effort into what actually works. And as we begin to discover what actually works, some of those things are things that colleges may be in a better position to offer, and some of them may be approaches that nonprofits can perfectly well facilitate. So, you know, I think they both have a role to play, but the important part is let's do the research and understand what we ought to be doing and do right by the students.
Would any of the other panelists like to chime in? All right, we have another question here. How are MOOCs changing the freshman experience? Colleges in Florida, Arizona, etc. are offering first year away from campus. So what do you predict? Panelists, anybody interested in responding to that?
I can take a crack at it if no one else wants to.
Please do.
Or you can add to what I have to say. I mean, I hadn't heard that actually, that they were thinking about doing that. But you know, one of the things that's interesting about MOOCs, and I think this came up before in some of the introductions, is that with the rise of MOOCs, people are asking more careful questions about the benefits of a college education, right? So if you can learn all this material online, then what's the benefit of paying X dollars a year to go to a college and get a degree that way? And you know, I think there's clearly value to going to college. I mean, there's value in the college experience that you can't replicate, at least currently in the MOOC format. And you know, the idea of having students just sitting at home and taking 1 year of classes or 4 years of classes seems to me to get rid of a lot of that. You would miss out on interaction with your peers. You would miss out on interaction with the faculty on campus. And it seems to me you'd be missing out on quite a lot. So I'm, you know, a bit skeptical perhaps about the idea of having your first year entirely away from campus. I think the idea maybe of using MOOCs, as in the previous question, to prepare students for what's coming when they come to campus is a good idea. But just outsourcing the whole campus experience and having people sit on their couches watching video doesn't seem to me like it's going to end up replacing everything that college can do.
If I could weigh in briefly, I agree with basically with everything Jonathan said. And in fact, sort of as an experiment, I tried flipping some of the lectures in my course, and we're probably going to offer a version that is entirely flipped for students who want to take it. I actually surveyed my students to get a sense of how many students would have been interested in doing that, having now had a semester in which some of the lectures were flipped and some were conventional, and it was split almost right down the middle. Some students clearly prefer both the sort of social structure and the forcing function of I'm going to hear about a certain topic at a certain time that is part of the college experience, for better or worse. And some students would have been happy to be able to do more of the work asynchronously on their own. So I don't think there's a single answer. And I think, in fact, unfortunately, one thing that tends to dominate conversations about MOOCs is, will it be this or that? It's always cast in terms of, will MOOCs replace this? Will colleges do that better? Should students do one or the other? They're going to do both. I think in the future, we used to talk about portable calculators and mobile phones, right? Now all calculators are portable, all phones are mobile, and just now we're talking about online education, right? There's going to be aspects that are online mixed into every course, and I think students will utilize them to a different degree. But I agree with Jonathan that that should we sort of be replacing an entire first year with that experience? That I don't see a universe in which that sounds like a great idea.
I'll be sure to pass that on to my president. Does anybody else have a comment on this?
I can comment on that. So the one thing that I think is interesting, I agree with everything that the other panelists said. I think there's a danger, at least when MOOCs first came out, there was this idea that we were giving away our product and maybe we're going to devalue the Harvard brand because we were giving it away for free. I think the danger is much more equating what our value is with what we're giving away in the MOOCs. I think that's a much greater existential threat to universities. Where, I went to Harvard as an undergraduate, so I've sort of seen this from both sides. And the lectures are the least interesting part of the experience. And the same thing with MIT. It's all the late night bull sessions with other students and all these things. Now, that's something we can, to an extent, recreate in MOOCs. And actually, the community on the forums, we found in our course at least, was really exciting because it's people from all walks of life, and they're getting together and they're having a little bit of that flavor, but it's not quite the same thing. So I don't think there's any danger that I don't think it's a good idea to replace a residential education by any stretch, but it is potentially a way to extend to across universities and extend to a broader audience. So I think there are strengths and weaknesses, but I don't think there's any call for residential going away anytime soon.
Great, thank you, folks. And I have been forgetting to attribute these questions to the people who asked them. The first one about the Khan Academy, etc., was from Brad in Oja. The second one about the freshman experience was from Jay in Massachusetts. Okay, this next question is from Ephraim in Baltimore, who asks, I have a son with Asperger's syndrome who is brilliant in the sciences but not sufficiently independent to be able to complete residential college education. So this is very pertinent to our preceding question. How can MOOCs help students with special needs become functioning members of society? David, I think you have a comment on this, correct?
Yeah, so we had a few cases that were very similar to what you're describing. In one case, we had a student who was developmentally delayed and actually wasn't able to communicate except through sort of a binary sort of press a button, not press a button. And he actually managed to take the entire course with the help of his mother. And for whatever reason, he just took to the way we were presenting the course. And he actually even sat for the exam, so which was quite remarkable. So I think there's a way that this can open up a window for people to explore on their own terms, on their own time. I think sometimes the formalism of MOOCs, where we pretend like they're courses and they have to have exams and things like this, can get in the way. But and as a result, we just keep our course open all the time, and students can sample from the stream whenever they like. And we've gotten quite a bit of feedback from people who see this as an alternate sort of entree into some intellectual world that maybe they wouldn't have had access to otherwise. I don't think that it's necessarily going to be a source of certification or and whether or not it teaches people practical skills, I'm not sure where that's all going to together. But I think just having a lifeline to some sort of intellectual world outside of your meeting environment, I think MOOCs could absolutely serve that role.
Thank you. Other comments? All right. Our next question is from Mike in Virginia, who asks, I'm a retired guy who's taking his 5th edX MOOC for the purpose of personal enjoyment and keeping my mind sharp. Do you consider these use cases as a primary purpose or as a nice side benefit? Do you ever consider whether people in my position have different needs in terms of teaching style? So, who would like to take that one?
I could say a little bit about it. I think there's sort of two questions being asked. And by the way, Mike, someday I assume I'll have to retire, and I think I'm going to end up doing the same things as you. In fact, one of the things about MOOCs is that there are so many that look really cool that I wish I had the time to take. But this day job, it's getting me down. Whether people in your position have different needs in terms of teaching style, that may very well be the case. I don't actually know, but I have been asked on a number of occasions, when you were preparing your MOOC, what audience did you have in mind as the learners? And I had a really simple answer. My audience is third-year computer science students at UC Berkeley. And that's because the MOOC has to be based on my campus course. We're not getting paid to do this. This isn't really a business for us. This is, as I said, we see it as a way of investing in our campus teaching as well as sort of getting useful materials, hopefully, out to the rest of the world. So essentially, I'm betting that there's a large group of people out there in the world for whom the same teaching style and materials that we use for our Berkeley students will also work for them. People that, but for some other thing, some other pathway in their life, might very well be the kind of people I'd be teaching at Berkeley. So, I think the question of whether different learners have different learning styles and different teaching styles that work better for them has to be separable from the question of who's creating things for which purposes. So I don't know if that's the answer you wanted to hear from me, but it's really a candid one. You have to know your audience, and I picked one audience.
Okay, great. Thank you. Any
Just
other
if I
thoughts on that?
I can just add one thing. I don't know about the age distribution of people participating in these MOOCs, but I do know that this idea that MOOCs are reaching out to bored teenagers who are too precocious and are looking for a college-level education because they're bored in their high school is not really an accurate picture of the population of MOOC students. Turns out that most MOOC students already have a degree, and so they're learning this for fun. They're learning it on top of their day job, and so you're certainly not the exception here.
Yeah, and can I just chime in? So obviously different MOOCs have different target audiences. We explicitly chose to target as wide a swath of people as we could. So my course on campus is meant for it's an introductory course for students with no prerequisites. And part of what I see our goal for our course is as largely as science outreach. So the more people we can get excited about science, the better. And actually we have a huge contingent of people who are retired. We had a number of people who were on maternity leave. We had people who were working through difficult periods in their life, like a parent dying. They would tell us this on the forums, and this was a distraction, an intellectual distraction for them. So we explicitly structured our course to be, you could sample from the stream in sort of 5-minute chunks if you wanted to, or you could delve deeper. And we wanted to give people as many on-ramps as possible to engage with the content. And then the feedback we got back was interesting. We actually dropped soundtracks and dropped the soundtrack volume because a lot of our older learners found the soundtrack distracting. So we were actually finding that we were sort of modulating some of what we were doing in response to feedback from a much broader audience than we were expecting to get initially.
Thank you. Okay, so we had a question from one of our panelists, actually, who was wondering, given that we have 3 different types of MOOCs represented by our 3 panelists, was there any difference amongst us in the completion rates of these courses? Do you guys know what your completion rates were?
7 to 10%. I think the highest we ever got was 10%. 7 is more typical.
That sounds about right for us, too.
Yeah. Although, as I have said a number of times, I'm not sure that completion rate, as it's currently defined, is a number that measures anything useful or interesting.
Yeah, there has been a lot of attention to that in the media. Okay, so I have a question for the panel. There's a framework out there by Mickey Chi which characterizes the kinds of activities that students can engage in at homework or in classroom or in MOOCs. And she found an interesting pattern in literature, which is called the ICAP pattern, which is an acronym for interactive, constructive, active, and passive. So if these characterize this four-way characterization suggests that passive activities where a person is paying attention, like to a video or an instructor lecturing, but not actually doing anything, are the least effective. Next least is active, where they're doing something, like, but it's merely representing the material, like they're taking verbatim notes, for example. Constructive is where they're doing something like writing a program or writing an essay or even writing a short response or creating something. That's constructive. They do it by themselves. And then interactive is a constructive activity done in collaboration, close collaboration with another person. So the literature supports the idea that interactive activities are the most effective, followed by constructive, and then active, and then passive. So I'm wondering, in the MOOC type setting, have you thought about how to increase sort of the percentage of activities amongst the students that are sort of high on the ICAP scale? Has anybody thought about that?
Actually, in my course, we have in a couple of different ways. And as I said, take the following statement with a disclaimer that 2 to 3 years from now, we'll probably look back at what we're doing now and sort of smile indulgently. But that said, we're trying a couple of different things specifically to get students not only to construct work, but to interact in small groups or in pairs while doing it. One of the ways that we're doing it, I briefly showed in my slides the screenshot of this collaborative tool that we built called MOOC Chat. The idea is that students are shown sort of questions that are at various levels of the Bloom taxonomy that test their knowledge of something that we just lectured about or that they had read about. And in addition to trying to answer the question solo, they then discuss in small groups, and they have the opportunity to change their answer. We've actually done controlled experiments where we give the group a bonus if everybody in the group converges on the same correct answer after discussion. And we found some interesting things already about the extent to which the composition of the group initially predicts whether they're likely to arrive at the right answer, and whether you should try to seed the groups by sort of moving the stronger students around, which is something you can do in an online setting but not in person. So we want to increase the amount of exposure for students to tools like that. Also in my course, because it's centered on creating software, pair programming is already, among software professionals, is a very widely used collaboration technique. And the nice thing about the precipitous drop in the cost of cloud computing is there are now services that allow students to pair program remotely, essentially for free, or at such low cost that we can underwrite it. So we're starting to institute structured pair programming sessions where not only can students work in pairs, but the community TAs can sort of virtually drop in from time to time and give them a little bit of coaching. So we're actually trying to steer as much as possible toward doing that. And of course, the challenge is pair programming with TAs works great as long as only a small fraction of MOOC students try to do it. So we're looking for ways to sort of scale up how students can help each other. And I'm sure many of you know that Scott Clemmer and some of his students have done some great work on peer assessment in MOOCs, and we haven't gone there yet, but I'm going to read more about Mickey's framework, but yeah, intuitively I think that's where we're trying to go. So it's nice to know that real research backs it up.
Other comments?
I'll just say something briefly. This is not in my course, but in one of the other courses that we have in the specialization, this capstone course I mentioned. So that actually involves letting the students form into groups of teams, about 3 or 4 people each. And so it's difficult, right? They've got to somehow self-organize. They've got to find people who are presumably within the same time zone, or at least working the same hours. And then they've got to coordinate also working on the capstone involves building a piece of software and then turning around and trying to attack other people's software. And so the course is still underway. It's being offered now for the first time, but we'll see how that goes.
Yeah, we had some interesting experiences too with getting students to actually do physical experiments. And as Armando said earlier, one of the things interesting about MOOCs is it gets people who might not have been interested in education research suddenly interested in education research. So we partnered with a PI at Purdue who does education research, and we wanted to study and do it. We actually structured our our physical experiment kits as a randomized controlled trial. So we actually gave half with and without, and we had a sort of controlled treatment. And it was very much the case that the students who received the kits and used them, and particularly used them in groups, they scored better on tests of a variety of things. But also the one that we really were excited about is this idea of science self-concept. So this picturing yourself as being a scientist was significantly boosted if the students actually did these physical things. So I think there's going to be a lot of things that we rediscover from education research and MOOCs, but there's also opportunities to sort of scale it up in a much bigger way than can traditionally be done in education research.
Well, thank you very much. Okay, we have a question from Jerome in New York who asks, is there a role for virtual reality or immersive technology to bring a feeling of presence, of being there to the student in the instructor forums or the discussion settings? Any thoughts on that, folks?
You know, I have an opinion. When they first invented TV cameras, the first thing they did was point the TV camera at a stage where live actors were performing a play. And it sort of took several years to realize that there were things you could create with a camera in a studio that had no counterpart, right? And now, if you saw a movie that was basically a filmed play, you'd be bored. So, you know, there may be a role for VR or immersive technology, but I don't necessarily think that it'll be to bring the feeling of being there. I think it'll be a different experience, and I think it probably, in the best of courses, will be an experience you cannot have in a physical classroom. That's extremely exciting. So, you know, I don't think trying to replicate the feeling of being there in the classroom is necessarily the right thing to do, but I think those technologies could actually, you know, imagine shrinking myself down to a size where I could, you know, I could be the cockroach, right, in some of these experiments that David describes. Maybe see biology from the cockroach's point of view. So that's my view.
Yeah, we've been having meetings all week about doing something in this space, and we have a relationship with Google, and we've been sort of working on thinking about pitching this. And I think Armando's exactly right. It's like, what kind of experiences could you have that would have a palpable, real pedagogical value? And one of them, you know, actually, you know, orders of magnitude of scale are very hard to think about, but that's something where potentially maybe you could, you know, shrink down to the scale and see how big things are, and then scale up and scale up. I think it's going to be hard, and I think our initial forays into VR are going to be sort of embarrassing in retrospect. They're going to be things like looking at the, you know, pointing the camera at the stage, but that's how we get started. And I think MOOCs are an interesting place to be playing in that domain because you know, you have a lot of technology savvy people who are interested in improving the world and teaching, and that's as good a place as any, I think, to explore these technologies.
Great. Well, we're getting towards the ending of our panel session here, so I'd like to say on behalf of the MIT Alumni Association, thank you, audience, for tuning in to the Faculty Forum Online. We didn't get to all the questions that were posed to the panel, but we'll certainly pass them along to our panelists, and you can also tweet about the event if you want using hashtag MIT Alum, all one word, or you can send follow-up questions and feedback to alumnilearn@mit.edu. So that's alumnilearn, all one word, @mit.edu. A video archive will be shortly posted on the MIT Alumni channel on YouTube. And again, thank you very much for watching. Have a nice day.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Kurt.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks again for joining us. For more information on future MIT Alumni Association productions, please visit our website.